Welcome to another week of Growing Disciples Daily Devotionals, continuing our theme on the teaching ministry of Jesus. This week we're exploring Jesus' teaching on prayer. The first thing we notice here, of course, is that in addition to his words, Jesus particularly used his own example to teach his disciples how to pray. And maybe one of the most potent of those teaching opportunities occurred as the time for Jesus' crucifixion drew near. And what does one do when one knows they are soon to be crucified? In Jesus' case, they pray, as is recorded for us in Mark chapter 14. Of course, it's the night before Jesus' crucifixion. It's late, very late, sometime after the Last Supper, verse 32. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Keeping watch is probably a figure for prayer. In other words, pray here. Verse 35, going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that, if possible, the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping, because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." So here at this crisis point in Jesus' life, as he prepares himself for the cross, he invites his 3 closest disciples to pray with him. What a privilege. The Son of God, what must he be feeling, knowing that the chain of events that leads to the horror of the cross has now begun? He reaches out, perhaps feeling weakness, apprehension, even dread. He reaches out and he invites Peter, James and John to privately come and pray with him, to keep watch. What a privilege for those 3 disciples. They had just one job to do, to stick tight with Jesus and pray, and they failed miserably on that occasion. But as an aside, from this point on in the Bible narrative, prayer becomes the predominant activity of the apostles when they are gathered all together. You scan through the book of Acts, read the apostles' letters. Aren't they always praying? Yes, they're eating together. Yes, they're searching the scriptures, but always in the context of prayer. So maybe this teaching moment was not wasted at all. So if you, like me, fail to pray at times when we think we really should be praying, there's room for us in Jesus' band of disciples, and there's hope. There's growth where we learn to watch and pray. But before we go there, let's remember that Jesus inviting disciples to pray with him that night in Gethsemane, it's part of a pattern, right? From the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus set aside time to pray, and on a number of occasions he invited his disciples to pray with him. Why? Because disciples learn to pray by sitting in on Jesus' prayers. Surely there's no better way to learn than to attend to Jesus as he prays. And so that's our plan this week, to learn to pray with Jesus by listening in on his prayers. The very obvious thing to notice about Jesus' prayer here is that he brought his whole self to God. his mind, his will, his emotions, his sense of vulnerability. In verse 33, he is described as deeply distressed and troubled. He says, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." In Luke's Gospel, Jesus is described as sweating drops of blood. In his emotionally charged state, Jesus brings it all to God. Not just his feelings, but he lays his will on the line as well. This is what I want, but let's go with what you want. I take it that we have the same freedom in coming to God. There are times for formal prayer, carefully structured and beautifully worded. But there is also a place for raw emotion, for our tears and fears, for our intentions and plans and hopes for the future. Now, one way that you might consider enriching your prayer life might be to bring your whole self to God in every dimension of your life, in every area of your life. I think another notable aspect of Jesus' prayer here is Jesus' address to God as Abba, or Dad. Jesus also invited his disciples into this same intimacy of address. Elsewhere, he taught his disciples to pray, "Our Father in heaven," our Father. So this relationship implied by addressing God in this way is, as well as loving intimacy, it's a relationship of dependence. Jesus calls upon his Father as provider and protector, and we are invited into that same kind of relationship. Similarly, as we call upon God then as provider and protector, we depend upon him. We depend upon God for life, for health, for food, for safety, for security, for even our next breath. So as we pray, God is our Father too. Now, I think the most surprising aspect of Jesus' prayer here is that God's answer is no. Jesus is asking, is there a plan B? Can the cup of suffering on the cross, can that unimaginable pain of your wrath being exhausted on me for the sins of the whole world, can this hour pass? In other words, can we do something else? Can this cup be taken away? Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we'd have to say that God answered Jesus' request with a clear no. In Jesus' experience then, and in his school of prayer for his disciples, there are times when God does not give us exactly what we ask. On the other hand, of course, there are many places in the Gospels when Jesus assures us that God will answer our prayers. Ask and you will receive. But sometimes the answer is no. Now, on reflection, there's a lot more going on in prayer then than us submitting an application form to God, which God may stamp approved or denied. Now, prayer is not about a simplistic yes or no answer. Notice Jesus submits his will to his Father's will. Here's my will, my request, get me out of here, God, but not my will, but your will. See, what's really going on here in this prayer is that Jesus' will is being brought into alignment with his Father's will. Notice Jesus prays this prayer 3 times. He's persistent. And God continues to answer no. And yet 3 times Jesus submits his will to his Father's will. There's an important part of prayer that's going on right here. We notice that Jesus is changed through his prayer. Prayer changes things and it changes us, aligning us with God's will. However, it's not just Jesus' will that's changed. Look at how he changes from being desperately distressed and overwhelmed in verses 33 to 34 to being, I think, energized and strengthened for the task ahead in verses 41, 42. After praying, he says something like, "Come on, you 3, enough sleeping. Let's do this. The hour has come." No longer is he saying, "Let this hour pass." No, the hour's come. Get up. Let's go. Here comes Judas. See, the answer to Jesus' prayer is that he is strengthened and ready. He embraces the work God had set before him. The answer to Jesus' prayer was not a change of plan, but rather God's enabling for the plan. Sometimes we wonder, if God knows what we're going to pray in advance, why bother praying at all, right? And if God is always going to answer no or yes according to his will, why bother praying? Why not be a fatalist instead? Now, in the face of this purely functional and simplistic view of prayer, Jesus' school of prayer shows us that the very act of praying persistently does change things. In this particular case, God's plan didn't change, but Jesus was strengthened to do the plan. Jesus' will became God's will. The process of prayer in relationship with his Father actually mattered. It always matters. Sometimes things go differently and our prayers result in an even better outcome than we had imagined. Here we could say that the outcome of Jesus' prayer resulted in an even better outcome, which was the salvation of the cosmos. So Jesus' school of prayer shows us that in times of crisis, Jesus prayed, and so we pray. We also know that in ordinary times, Jesus prayed, and so we pray. As Jesus prayed to his Father, his protector and provider, he brought his whole being, his will, his feelings, his vulnerability, every aspect of humanity, of our humanity, is welcomed in prayer. So if you're facing challenges or the unknown today, don't waste a crisis. Follow Jesus in prayer. I encourage you to do that right now.